And then last April, I went back to see my cancer doc, the oncologist. She had tears in her eyes, and she said, I'm really sorry to tell you, nothing's worked. The cancer's spread, it's totally incurable. It's in your stomach, it's in your liver, it's in your spine and in your brain.
Where'd you grow up?
Bournemouth, actually.
Was it really?
Yeah. Always lived by the seaside.
Did you?
So now living in LA, as we call it. Littlehampton.
Family background, mum and dad at home?
Mum and dad at home, little brother. None of them churchgoers at all. So when I saw a poster at school when I was 11 or 12 advertising the Boys Brigade. And I thought, well, that's interesting. So Boys Brigade, like the Scouts, but you have to go to church on a Sunday, which if it's a good church, that's brilliant. But the church I went to, man, it was so boring. I felt sorry for God having to be there. I mean, omnipresence has its drawbacks, doesn't it, sometimes? But went along, and then a year in, went on a summer camp, and there was a vicar there at this camp who believed in God and communicated in an amazing way, in a way that I understood for the first time. And I thought to myself, this is either the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard, or it's true. And if it's true, I need to do something about it. And he gave us all a little booklet called Journey into Life. Had a little road sign on it, so we called it Journey Round the Bend. But do you know what? I must have read that 20 times. And I thought, I'm going to do something about this when I get home. So at the end of the week, we'd all got sunstroke. None of us had washed or changed our pants all week. But I remember getting home, dumping my suitcase in the kitchen, running up to my bedroom, getting on my knees and reading out the prayer in the back, saying, God, if you're there, come in and change me. I'm sorry for all those wrong things that I've done. I want to live for you as a Christian for the rest of my life. And I did it. And as a 12, 13-year-old, I meant it with all my heart and said amen. And it said, within 24 hours, tell someone of your decision to become a Christian. So I went downstairs, told my dad, who clipped me around the ear. So what have you done a stupid beep, beep, beep thing like that for? And that was the start of the story, really.
Wow. What were you into as a younger kid? What were you passionate about? Anything, you know?
I really got into the Boys Brigade.
Did you?
I got into pogo stick, actually. Now, that's something you don't know about me. I became I wouldn't say a world champion, but I was very proficient. We had this pretty girl move into our street when I was 11 or 12, and we all fancied her, and we lost so many footballs in neighbours' gardens we weren't getting them back. So me and my mates thought, how are we going to attract this girl, Gillian? So I found a pogo stick in my garage that I was always rubbish on it, and that summer we became brilliant on the pogo stick.
No way.
And me and my mates, none of us got the girl, but it just goes to show sometimes the journey is just as much fun as the final destination. That's all right. So dogs take my coat here.
So, growing up, GCSEs, O-levels back then?
O-levels back then, back in the day. I left school in 83. No one in our school went to uni. So I started working for Barclays Bank. My mum, bless her, said that's a job for life. Banks never close. Little did she know. Financial foresight, obviously not her thing. I had a friend who worked for Barclays, and she ended up interviewing me, and I started work at 16 and was there for 5 years. So I was going to church at the same sort of time. It was still boring, and I found it really irrelevant, you know.
This is in Bournemouth?
This is still in Bournemouth. I worked for 4 different branches, Barclays, and one year I was stewarding at Spring Harvest. So I wanted to give, and I thought, well, there's not much I can do, but I can move chairs, and I look great in a tabard and a walkie-talkie. So I was a steward, and one night at Spring Harvest, we'd shifted thousands of chairs, and someone was preaching and said, I believe tonight God is calling people into full-time Christian work as evangelists, as someone who tells other people about God. And I felt, it sounds weird, but I felt God tap me on the shoulder. And I went up the front and they prayed for me. And I resigned from work a year later. Mum and Dad went ballistic. As I said earlier, they weren't Christians, and I've been on the road ever since. So this year, 36 years, travelling the world, go anywhere once, telling people this good news. Because Christians use this word gospel, but gospel means good news. And good news is for sharing it. It's wrong to keep it to ourselves.
That's powerful, because, you know, people will probably seen you or heard of you, comedy, funny guy, but actually your heart is to tell people the good
Do you know
news.
what? All these things are gimmicks. People say, well, isn't the comedy just a gimmick? And I said, well, of course it is. Jesus told stories to unbelievers, and half the time he didn't explain them. So it's opened doors for me that I would never have normally had. I mean, I've spoken at occult festivals in Mexico City during the Day of the Dead and seen hundreds become Christians. That went down so well, they invited me back the following year and I was on the posters. An occult festival. Wow. I mean, it's madness. I've written books and I've travelled around, but it's just telling people this good news that there's a God in heaven who's not a boring old man who looks like Father Christmas floating about on a white fluffy cloud wearing a Marks and Spencer's negligee, but he's a brilliant dad, a perfect father who knows everything about us and still wants to be best friends with us. It's great, good news, isn't it?
That's good news. And you've done is it 1 million miles? You clocked it recently.
Oh yeah, over 1.5 million miles on the road. Normally, in a good year, do 50,000 miles with the gigs, and you work that out over 34 years. I think it's to the moon and back about 4 or 5 times.
Wow.
And that's enough nectar points for a set of tumblers.
One of the things we need to talk about, because people often assume you become a Christian, it's because it's a crutch or you're weak or
Yeah.
you're vulnerable. Or you become a Christian and get this kind of perfect life. That's not the case, is it, mate?
No, it's not.
Life doesn't go that way.
Well, people say Christianity, is it a crutch? Well, no, and yes, it is. It helps us. And it's really helped me these last few years. 2.5 years ago, my wife nagged me about a tiny little black mark, maybe half a centimetre on the underside of my foot. And she nagged, and eventually I went to the doctors, and to cut a very long story short, it turned out to be a very unusual form of skin cancer, nothing to do with the sun, some sort of rogue gene in me. And because it had been there for a while and we hadn't realised, it had grown through my body, gone up through my lymphatic system, had a few very impressive ops on my foot. I got some great pics for the weirdos out there. And a couple of ops, they opened me up, they took all my lymph nodes out in my groin and pelvis area, so I've got a 14-inch scar there that is very, very impressive. I asked the consultant if he could make it a bit jagged as he sewed it up, so I'd have a shark tail story, but he wasn't allowed to, professional standards and all that. And then last April, I went back to see my cancer doc, the oncologist. She had tears in her eyes, and she said, "Look, I'm really sorry to tell you, nothing's worked. The cancer's spread, it's totally incurable. It's in your stomach, it's in your liver, it's in your spine and in your brain." And you can imagine, it hit me for 6. And I said to her, "How long have I got then, doc? 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years?" Thinking she said, "Well, 5, 10, 20 years. And she said, 5 months. And, hearing news like that...
Where'd you go with that?
Well, I couldn't say anything for a while. And we went out and had a few more scans, and the nurse said, "Would you like a drink?" I said, "I'll have a double brandy, please." So we all had a laugh about that, and then went back to see her, and we just talked about telling my girl, she's got 5 daughters, and she asked about things coming up in our life, and I said, so this was April the 17th, and I said, well, we got a granddaughter being born in 6 weeks. She said, well, you probably be around for that. I thought, probably? This is madness. And we just went away and cried. I cried for 4 days. This was the Monday. But I was aware in the back of my mind, well, not really in the back of my mind, forefront of my mind, I had 4 gigs that weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Gigs where I'd be making people laugh, telling them about Jesus. And I thought, there's no way I could do this. And I got my pal Tony Vino, great Christian comedian, on standby. And then I spoke to a few friends, Carl Beach, Ishmael, Jonathan Vieira, and a few others. And I said, what do you think? And they said, well, if you can, you should do it. This is what you've been called to do, and this will add another string to your bow. So I got a grip on myself, pulled myself together, went on stage on that Thursday night, and I've been gigging ever since.
Do you, I mean, the question in my mind that I would think I'd ask is, why me? I've done 1 million miles,
Yeah.
I've done 30 plus years.
1.5 million, please.
1.5 million. I've not done my own thing.
Yeah.
I've really gone after you and shared your life, Jesus. Why has this happened to me?
No, I've never asked it. I've never asked why. I've said, well, why not? Why not me? For me, it's been really liberating. Thinking I had 150 days. That's 5 months. That's 22 weeks. How am I going to make every day count? And it's not a death sentence for me. It's been a life sentence. And I've been able to share that with people. And I think it's a very interesting, empowering way to live. If we all knew we only had 150 days left, how would we live? What would we do? What wouldn't we do? Who would we see? Who wouldn't we see? I think it's really liberating. And I'm still here. And you haven't got to be Carol Vorderman to figure out she's wrong. And listen, if I die tomorrow, I've had an amazing life. And if I'm still here in 20 years, wow, what a story.